There you go. So are we online or not?
We are live.
Okay, cool.
Guys, good evening and welcome to our live broadcast with Hero Goalie Co. We're a new brand in the UK, delivering goalkeeper coaching at all levels. But tonight it's all about goalkeeping, and we've got an amazing guest list for you. Along with Allan Dick, my co-owner of Hero Goalie Co. We're very pleased to welcome Jimi Lewis. Jimi's former GB international, Olympian, German goalkeeper coach, and I could go through his list of honours, but it's massive. He also wears a snapback better than me, which is a bit annoying. Mark Hickman, current GB goalkeeper coach, with also an Olympic gold medalist, former Australian goalkeeper. Really pleased to have Mark with us. And Hurst, the legend that is, former Great Britain goalkeeper, former Great Britain goalkeeping coach, and the actual goalkeeping go-to man. Guys, also Allan Dick, a former Scotland international, and he's really in charge. I just do all the talking. So, guys, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Great to be here.
Nice to see you all.
So if you're listening and tuning in wherever you are in the world, thanks for joining us. Really pleased to have this event, and really privileged to have this amazing list of goalkeepers and the wealth of knowledge all together on the same chat. So, Allan, before we get going, anything you want to add that I've missed off in terms of getting us going?
No, just massive thank you to everyone that's tuning in, and to the guys for joining us. I think that's it's nice to get an event off the ground. Obviously, we're in the process of planning things in terms of the coaching side, but it's really nice to be joined by three absolutely top coaches, and it'd be really good to get their thoughts on some of the questions that we're going to ask.
Yeah. Okay, Allan, thank you. So, guys, if you're listening, you can add questions to the chat. We'll try and take as many of those as we can. We've got some really interesting things to talk about. Hopefully, we've got goalies, we've got goalie coaches, we've got people at club level, wherever you are, whatever level you're at. Oh, Simon Mason. Hello, Simon Mason. We're really pleased you're joining us. First of all, guys, just going to go around and hear what you guys are up to at the moment, because you former players, and you're all doing various amazingly interesting jobs around the world. Jimi, what are you up to at the moment?
I'm currently since 2015, I'm the German national team goalie coach or head coach. I'm responsible for all the teams, boys and girls, from under 16s to up to seniors. I predominantly work with the under 21s and seniors. There's not enough time to work with the under 18s and 16s. I've got goalie coaches that work under me and coach my ideas and principles with those teams. And I'm also the goalie coach for Club Under Elster, which is a club here in Hamburg in Germany. And also just started up my own company as well with Tommy Alexander, who's the Scottish #1 goalkeeper, and Ivy Frank. He's a former German national team goalkeeper and triple Olympian. We just started up our own company exactly a year ago, to be honest. And then obviously the pandemic come, and we only managed to do 3 camps last year, but they were pretty full, to be honest, the camps. And at the moment, I am going between training camps. I've had 6 camps this year already, with men and women, 1 under 21 camp and 1 men and women's camp together at the Hockey Pro League games last weekend in Holland. And we had 4 camps in Mannheim. They got this big bubble where they train there, so you can train outdoor, indoor, basically. So we had 4 training camps there because the weather here in Germany obviously is not really been good enough to play outside, to be honest. But yeah, busy. In between time, I'm a father to 2 children. You keep me really busy, to be honest.
And Hicko, what are you up to, mate?
So, my position, if we look at that, first of all, similar to Jimi, but over in GB. So although obviously the accent is Australian and that's where the playing career was, I've been pretty lucky to spent the last 2 years over here in the UK, currently in Belfast with the women's team. And we've got some games coming up against Ireland over the next few days. But I guess the main thing that I've been working on over in GB is it's the same as Jimmy. And one of the reasons that I'm so excited to talk sort of tonight about is the area that I'm passionate about is growing the goalkeeping community, and the thought of how we can empower more people to express themselves in terms of their goalkeeping, but also their goalkeeping coaching, because there's not only one way to sort of do things.
Good, agreed. Love that. Hursty.
Well then, I used to do what Mark's now doing and what Jimmy does in this country. But at the moment, it's very interesting, really, isn't it? Because I haven't done much coaching at all for months and months and months. I volunteer at the Oaklands Academy, which is in St Albans, and do the goalkeeping work there for Simon Archer, who's the academy coach. That's a volunteer job. Any of the coaching I do, when I get the opportunity, I tend to bring people into that place, the academy, and use the facility after the kids have gone home. So I get use of the pitch if I have, work there. So that's what I'm doing, but I haven't done anything much since October on the pitch, to be honest. Looking, hopefully, to start again probably after Easter now. I have done some online stuff, though, which has been quite good. So one of the keepers I coach, her mother bought a ball machine. And they've got a large garden, and they've got a goal. And they set the ball machine up, put me on an iPad on a stand so I could see what was going on. Mum fed the ball machine to my direction, and I coached the goalkeeper as the balls flew at her. And surprisingly, it worked quite well, and we made very good use of what were limited resources at the time. This was last summer. And I've done a few of these things for various people as well. So, online chat, online coach. So it's kept me busy, but my day tends to be slightly more relaxed than these guys at the moment, I suspect.
You've deserved it, Hurst.
Right. You've earned it, Hurst. You've been at it a long time. And Allan, what are you up to, mate? Teaching?
Teaching, yeah. So primary teacher as well. So I got year 3. So we were back at school this week. So it's been interesting after God knows how many weeks they've been at home. So it's been interesting getting them back into class and sort of seeing how they are interacting with each other. When I'm not doing that, I'm coaching Upminster ladies. So I'm their ladies first team coach. But obviously, like Hurst, they haven't been on the pitch since October. So and we've had our season cancelled now. So all the good work that we were doing is kind of for nothing. But yeah, looking forward to getting back on the pitch at some point, hopefully very soon.
And you set up a business?
I did, yes. I did. I forgot to mention that I set up a business, kind of like Jimmy. So we've done it a year after. We've looked at what Iconic did, but yeah, we'll have a bit of that as well.
Yeah.
What about you, Kiro? What are you up to?
One wearing a snapback, just basically copied it.
What about you, Kiro?
Well, I'm head of hockey at Simon Langton in Canterbury Grammar School. Really good history of hockey players there. People like Dave Matthews and lots of other people went there. So it's really enjoying that. I'm a year into that. I'm head coach at Marden Hockey Club in Kent, which is like near Tunbridge. That was going really well until the season got canned. And I'm a year into being the Wales goalie coach for the men's senior team. Really, really enjoying that. And I know I've drawn on Hicko and Hursty's advice a lot on that. So very busy. Also got 2 boys. So no, it's great. Really enjoying it. And I would also say, not a plug at all, with Hero, Allan and I are really passionate that goalkeeping should be accessible. And like if you want to get some coaching, it shouldn't cost the earth. So we want to try and make sure that one of our things is people can access good coaching and aren't almost like priced out of it. We want to make sure that it can be reached by everybody. That's really passionate about that as well. So right, thanks for that, guys. Really interesting. Let's crack on then, because first thing I wanted to have a look at is Now, you've all been international goalkeepers. You've all played in big tournaments and games. Now, your goalkeeper coaches have been goalkeeper coaches. What is the main differences between being a goalie coach at international level and being a goalkeeper at international level, and how you go about it and how you think about it and how you talk to the goalkeepers? I suppose you can't get too pally. You've got to think about, what you want from them. And I suppose in the modern style, it's sometimes player-led is like kind of, the modern way sometimes. Just put it out to the floor. What you guys think about that?
Go on,
Jimmy, I'll start, mate, because I know that you'll have something better afterwards. Okay.
Okay.
Keir, look, it's a good question. I'd probably just highlight two things from my perspective. And that's firstly that I think being a coach is easier than being a player. And that might be a personal reflection, but certainly, having played the position internationally as well, the demands are different. And it's not to say that being a coach is easy, but I always have clear in my mind that being a player is the most important, and it's the most challenging, because in the end, they're the person that's in the arena. The fortune of a coach is that you can remove yourself a bit from the arena and provide value because of that. So I think firstly there's that difference in terms of how you sort of approach it. You can afford maybe to see things in a different way. Now that has good and bad sides. I think the challenging side maybe for a coach for me is that because you're not playing, you feel that you don't have the same sort of control as you had as a player when you were in control of everything that you were doing on the pitch. And then finally, and one thing that, I always try to reflect on is because of COVID, I've actually had to put the pads on with the national teams, and that's something I haven't done in a long time. And hopefully there's no footage of that sort of floating around.
Yes, I really hope there is.
I can see a few smiles already, but if you want to see some things, it's me putting the pads back on. But one of the things that brought home to me was that as a coach, you see the goal and the goalkeeper always together. Whereas as a goalkeeper, obviously you're in a position where you're always really looking out to the field, and your understanding of where you are to the goal is always compromised. So that's also something that I've probably found, has been one of the challenges around it.
Cool. Jimmy?
From my side, the biggest difference is what Mark said. You're either, as a goalie, you're on the pitch and you're the one who's got to save the balls and you're in the action. We know how difficult that is. We've all played at top level at some time or another. And it's not as easy as it looks, obviously. And you get a lot of field coaches and field players who think, why did the goalie not save that ball? And we obviously know more details about that. And it's not always just that simple. I think the biggest difference is, for me, is that all of my work is done away from the game. It's done on the training pitch. So I'm preparing the goalies so when they go into that arena, then they've got everything. They've got the ability to actually perform there. I see that as my role, is to prepare them for battle, basically, and give them all the tools they need. They have to pull out the right tools in the right moment during the game. Obviously, that's their thing. And for me, it's about giving them the tools, and that's the difficult part of the job, because not all the goalkeepers have got the same ability. Obviously, physically, athletic, mentally, whatever. Well, that's the biggest difference for me is everything's done away from the pitch, and everything's. If I don't play myself anymore. I played till I was 41. In the Bundesliga here in Germany. So it's been 5-6 years since I've had the pads on. Since 2015, I stopped. I went straight into full-time goalie coaching afterwards. So the biggest difference is obviously, when you're playing, you know about the different scenarios, what's going on in the game these days. And everything on my side now is all theory. It's not actually done in practice. And that's one of the biggest challenges for me, is trying to keep on top of the game and not just trying to play catch up with the game, is actually trying to think ahead what's going to happen in the future with the game, what's going to come next year. There's different trends that are coming all the time in the game, with corners, with the open play, with the rules changing the game as well. My goalie concept, my goalkeeping coaching concept is quite different to the way I played. And it's evolving all the time. It's not something that's set in stone. I have principles that I work to, obviously, with the goalkeepers. and that's but it's changing, it's evolving all the time. The game evolves, the goalkeeping role evolves as well, and I see that as one of my biggest challenges as the coach of the national team players, is to actually keep myself on top of the game, looking what's coming up in the future, and trying to get that over to the goalkeepers. And as I say, trying to get them prepared for battle. It's different, obviously. As a player, you have this real motivation, you have this fire, you have the energy, and as a coach, you see things in a more analytical way of doing it, because it's mostly theory, if you know what I mean. It's done away from the pitch. So that's the biggest challenge for me, the biggest difference.
Kirsty.
Yeah, well, I would agree entirely with all of that, to be honest. And I wrote something down. You know, as a goalkeeper coach, you can't do the job without experience, but you can't get experience without actually having the job and being on the case. So it's kind of almost mutually exclusive. So probably, and I'll open this to you guys, probably the best keeper coaches are those that have played at a reasonably high level, because we understand what it's all about. And there was only one time when, probably now, oh God, Lord, it's 2002. I hadn't put the pads on for 10 years or so. And it was in the days of the drag flick, you know, and it was becoming really, really important in the game. And in my view, too many were going in. Jimi was there when this happened, and I was getting quite frustrated that the keepers, Jimi Mace was another one, Nick Taylor was another one, were not going the right way at the drag flick. And I was thinking, I don't care if they don't save it, but I'm sure they shouldn't actually go the wrong way. So I put the kit on and had a go to see if I was bamboozled by the flick as much as it seemed that they were. Remember, these were the early days, pretty much, and we hadn't learned how to read it as well as they do today. It's rare today to see a keeper go the wrong way, but it was quite common in those days. So I put the kit on. I got in goal. The physiotherapist, Laura Hanna, thought I was going to have a heart attack, so she was getting all panicky. And I never went the wrong way, but neither did I say. I knew where it was going. So that really confirmed my suspicions that it was trainable. You know, it would come with experience. When the guys saw many more over many, many more years, it would become easier for them and therefore us when we coach it, if that makes sense. But apart from that, you know, and sort of really fully agreeing with what the other two said, you do need the experience, but the coaching side of it, it's not the same as playing, but I think you need to play it to understand what it's like.
Yeah, I would just also say that, you know, every goalie coach has got his own way of doing things. And when I worked with you, Hursty, last summer with Maddie, I was really interested in how you spoke to the group of goalkeepers and how you spoke to Maddie in particular. One thing I liked was there wasn't too much talking, actually. You made your points quite concisely and let the goalkeeper get going. And, you know, when you're doing a session and you get the goalie in the groove, you've got to kind of I was really impressed with how you recognise the flow of the session and then let it go. And then also, you know, when it naturally paused and needed a word, just that kind of timing and sense of what was needed as a goalie coach. And I know from John, that's something I picked up from you at St Albans last summer.
Well, I think the other two have said this, to be honest, Mark and Jimi, in that the goalkeeper really needs to lead it. And I think if you have too much of a set plan, then and you try and stick to it, it might be going the way that isn't suitable for that particular environment. The goalkeeper will be doing something and it will go in a particular direction, and you let it go and you pull it back if you need to. But most of the time, particularly with the top guys that you guys work with, you know, they will be moving nicely in the theme that you've set up. So I don't tend to overplan. I've got an idea, I start it and see where it goes. I mean, we all know that we've got keepers with, I won't say weaknesses because they tend to be international keepers, but keepers who are slightly weaker in one particular area of the game. So, you know, you make that a bit of a focus. Try not to. Yeah, go on, Alan. Sorry.
Sorry, I was going to say, Louis, just maybe people don't know, because you worked with us at Scotland, with the Scotland squad for about sort of 18 months, 2 years.
Yeah, 2 years.
You were still playing then.
Yeah.
So since you've retired, you think the way you coach now is different to that kind of period now that you have retired?
Yeah.
In what way, and sort of, I suppose, in what way has that changed?
Well, firstly, I think the game's got a lot quicker these days. A lot quicker. I've gone away from doing a lot of technical training with the goalies, which I was mad and having a really clean technique. That's the way I played. I was told a lot when I was me and Hurst might have a different opinion on this, but I was told a lot when he was my goalie coach my whole career, so it'd be interesting to see what he says about it. But I was actually told that I was technically the best goalkeeper in England. That's what I was always told throughout my career. Doesn't mean you saved the most balls, just means you got the nicest technique. So I was really mad on technique, and something had to look a certain way and be a certain way. I've gone away from that because I don't think a lot of the techniques we used to use back in those days, it's only going back about 10 years, I'm not sure they're doable anymore because the balls move so fast these days. I do a lot of reaction training with the goalkeepers, and it's just about saving the ball, trying to clear the ball away to the outside. If it's possible, away from the middle of the circle is one of my big themes. It's not to give away rebounds still, but it's getting more and more difficult, I have to say. And I mean, the main principles of my training and my ideas have stayed the same. It's I do low repetitions, lots of sets. So to keep the power high, keep the speed high. All my trainings are sort of high-powered trainings. They're not the typical German goalkeeper training session. There's 500 balls in 2 minutes, dive here, slide here, kick this, whatever. And they're completely out of power and can't breathe anymore after 2 minutes. They save a lot of balls, but it's not actually done with any structure. You know what I mean? So it's what I've tried to change here, is bring a structure into the goalkeeping process here. Is what I'm trying to teach other coaches, and trying there's like a scientific part to the goalkeeping game and an artistic part, basically, is what I think. The scientific part is the principles that we all work to, athletic things and angles and these kind of stuff, timings. And the artistic side of it is trying to express yourself on a hockey pitch. And I'm always a believer of if you can make a save look extravagant, then you should do it. We always like to make the saves look good. And you don't get much to do in goal, so we're going to do something and do it properly. But the main aim is to keep the ball out of the goal. Obviously, there's no point making it look good and letting it in. Interesting what Hursty just said, because I never knew that from Hursty, that he used to come to our trainings with no real set plan, but just like a theme. And that's exactly what I do as well. I come to the training and I don't ever write my training sessions down. I don't really plan them. Most of them, I come with a couple of intro exercises that I do, drills that I do, which has got a theme base to it, and it just develops. I just get ideas come in my head during the training session, and I'll just try something out. If I don't like it, I'll change it straight away. I don't like practicing bad things, rubbish things. So I'll change it straight away, say, sorry, guys, it was a bad idea. We don't do it. We move on and do something else. But normally these kind of develop into sort of match play situations, and with rebounds and angles, different shots and reactions, this kind of stuff. But when I used to coach you guys in Scotland, I mean, I'd done a bit of coaching in England as well, obviously. I used to coach James Fair. I used to coach Nick Taylor also when he was much younger. I haven't. He was back in the day. Fairy when he was at Cannock, and he was my number 2 goalkeeper. And I used to do some work for Hursty as well with the junior goalkeepers, under 16, under 18 with England. And that's where I kind of made my bread and butter work, if you know what I mean. It's where I put my foot in the door. And but yeah, I've gone away from get back to where I started. I've gone away from doing so much technical stuff, and it's more to do with just reacting and angles, and something I've learned in Germany, obviously, because it's a very German thing of just getting in the way of the ball. And the English way of doing it, and the Australian way also, or let's say the British-speaking lands, English-speaking lands, their way of dealing with situations is in a more technical kind of way, and clearing the ball away to the outside and these kind of things. We work on that all the time in training, but I say away from the the basic techniques. I do that as a warm-up at the beginning of every session, and it goes directly into reaction training. But I think that's the most important thing these days.
Can I just say that on the chat, Simon Mason has just said, no one can coach Jimi's style. He and Tommy are both from the same brilliant mould.
Oh, mate. You never used to say that when we were in the team together.
Also, a good friend of mine, Rob Allan, says in the chat, like, should you coach style, or where does style come into it? Should you coach style? How much do you make that goalkeeper into a kind of a mould, or from what Jimi's saying is pretty much like express yourself and do it your way as long as it's efficient.
Style comes from the heart, man. You've got it or you haven't. I don't think you can develop style, to be honest. And you certainly can't push your own style on somebody else. That's what I'm learning. It's what I'm trying to teach Tommy Alexander as well. He's in a similar sort of coaching mold all the way at the moment, where I was 10 or 15 years ago, where something had to look a certain way. And I'm getting away from that now. And if it works, it works. And all goalies are different. They've all got different capabilities. They've all got different strengths and weaknesses. And I'm actually getting away from trying to put somebody in a box and say you have to do that. If they're doing something and it works, why you want to change it? That's taking away someone's natural ability, I think, to be honest. And if you're trying to force your principles and your ideas onto somebody and it's not working for them, then I don't think you can put people in the box, to be honest.
No, and also if you look at someone like Van Ash, for example, his style works for him. It'd be really hard to coach that for anyone else. He's got pretty low hands, and actually, there's definitely a way of allowing the goalie to find what works for them, for sure. Okay, that's beautifully linked, completely unintentionally, to style. And the next question really is how the goalkeeping role has evolved, and actually which goalkeepers along the way, looking back, 10, 20 or so years, like which goalies have been actually involved in the changing of the goalkeeping position. I know Allan and I talked about Ian Taylor. That's actually a little bit before, definitely my time, but I've watched some clips and he looks like a bit of an innovator. In the modern era, like Maddie, I would say, Maddie Hinch in the ladies' game, like Rio, that kind of Olympics, her style was kind of redefined that athletic, mobile, out and about goalkeeping, but again, the game's moved on a lot since then. And I know Mark might mention something about that, but Hursty, I'll go to Hursty first. Looking back, which goalies do you think might have actually been important in changing the role of the goalie as the game evolved, or is it just a game?
No, I don't think it's just a game. I mean, it's quite interesting to sort of think while Jimi was talking there, because you talk, Jimi, about different countries having a different style. And I think that's very true of not just goalkeepers, but hockey as well. So normal players. So if you see 4 players with, well, if I see, and probably you as well, 4 players running on a hockey pitch and they hadn't got national kit on, I reckon I could tell you what countries they were from by the way that they ran. And you could probably all do the same, certainly Mark and Jimi. And I think goalkeeping is a bit similar to that. So you can spot the keeper almost from the country he's from or she's from. So there is, I think, I use the word style, it's been poo-pooed, but there is a national style. And it's in the genes. I don't think you can actually remove it. Going back over the years, the first one that I thought had a real influence on the game was a guy called Harry Cahill. And we're going back to the 50s and the 60s now. Now, I only saw Harry play when he was in his 50s, and he was still playing county hockey when he was in his 50s.
How old were you then, Hursty? Were you 40 then, or what?
I would have been. It would be
shots fired.
So I would be. It would be I'd be mid-20s, 30 odd, something like that. And he was still playing. I mean, the poor man's now died. But some of the people watching might know that he is unique, I think, and that he played in 3 separate Olympics. in 2 separate sports for 2 different countries. So he was an Irish triple jumper and a GB keeper in consecutive Olympics. I think that's quite probably unique. But he could kick a ball, and we're talking about the days before foam. So this was purely technique, really. He could hoof a ball off the other end of the pitch from his own circle without it bouncing. Right? Now, the balls were leather, so they're a bit softer, but he was wearing wadding and a steel toe cap boot. And I mean, he was a sensation in India on dry pitches because he also could launch an attack on the right wing on the opposite 25. You know, he was that good. And he was the first one, I think, that for me, you know, having seen it, when I saw him, he could only clear the halfway line. But that was pretty impressive because he still wasn't wearing any foam. So he was the first one. Then there was a guy over here called Peter Mills, and he was the first keeper really that at corners dived a bit in English hockey anyway, in the early 70s. In other countries, Martin Sicking in Holland was one that I always looked up to. He was very much the continental style, but he always got his angles very good. Ian Taylor, obviously, who was my sort of mate in the England and GB, well, particularly the England team. My GB career came extremely late in my career. And to say a word about him and me, I suppose, as well, there was no keeper coaching in those days, and we were often left to our own devices. Training weekends were becoming more prevalent. We were the first group, I suppose, that played more than 2 games a year. So the people before us, if you got 3 caps, that was good because they only played a couple of weekends a year. So we had training weekends, you know, maybe every other weekend. And often we were left to our own devices because the coaches didn't really know what they were doing with keepers. So we started coaching ourselves, and that's where it all came from for us. You know, I helped him, he helped me, and we evolved from that sort of thing. So he was a great influence. A guy called Pleshakov, who was Russian, and I don't know whether Mark's heard of him, but he was around in the 80s when the USSR were really at their peak before the whole place collapsed. But he had a brother, twin brother, who played centre forward, and they were identical. One was a goalie, one was a centre forward. I was convinced they actually changed positions. So if the centre forward was tired, the goalkeeper went up front. You know, you wouldn't have known. They were absolutely identical. He was the first one that laid down at a corner properly, without any kit on. But as the corner developed and AstroTurf was, you know, more and more prevalent, the short corner striking was very good, and the ability of the goalkeeper standing up to stop it was not, because you couldn't move into the corners that quickly. And we hadn't got the kit anyway, but he laid down and blocked off most of the goal. There was a German called Klaus Ludwigsack, Jimi, who did the same thing, and Jim Irvin removed one of his testicles, Mark.
I know the story very well.
You know that story.
Right.
After I heard that story, I was about 14 at the time. I started wearing 2 boxes after that.
Yeah. But no kit, you know. But he was again influential because he was the first one that we all copied really in charging and lying down. Charging came after him. Charging came, or did it? Yes, it did. Charging came after him. It was laying down with him, charging, and then logging again. So, and charging.
Hursty, just a quick message from Ramon Jeffraser. He was
what a good goalkeeper. Hello.
He says, I remember those brothers well.
Yeah.
The Pleshakov brothers. Yeah.
Well, funnily enough, I've written him down as another influential keeper of the 90s because I thought he was really good, very athletic.
He's in my list.
One
Janssen.
of Allan's favourites.
Pardon?
One of Allan's favourites, I think.
Oh,
yeah, good. Yeah. I hope he's soaking up the plaudits that are coming his way as we feet. Janssen in Holland. And
Hey!
I mean, if you're talking about experience, I mean, I think I'm right in saying that there's a guy who didn't really play international hockey as first choice until he was about 29, and he played for 10 years. And he's still, I still credit him with the best save I think I've ever seen at the World Cup in '98. Were you there, Mark? Was that just before
Looking
you?
it on TV.
I mean, he made a. I mean, take me to. I don't think I could explain it without showing you it, but it was a remarkable save, and you think, wow. I mean, there's no. You can't coach that. He made this save. He tipped the ball over the bar, diving backwards with his stick. You know, and you think that's not coachable. You'd never invent a practice where you put it in it. You know.
Was he wearing the white pads or the painted orange pads at the time?
Orange, yeah, with a Dutch flag, Bravo pad.
Yes. And then if we move through a bit further, Simon Mason, I think, was very influential, particularly for the 10 years or so that Simon played. Vogels, who came after Janssen, and a little story here again. Vogels was number 2 to Janssen for about 6 years, and he learned his trade. And I suppose my theme here is the experience one again. You know, you learn by watching, you learn by playing the occasional game, and then when it's your turn, you've got so much experience in the locker that it's a little bit easier to make it your role and your position for a longer time. Van Asch, I think's influential in the modern men's game. Cortez, I think, is influential in the modern men's game. But we haven't talked about women. And I'm sure there are plenty of those around. I've made a little list here, all mostly English, because I do think that we were amongst the best in the women's game for quite a long time. Jo Thompson, Hilary Rose, Carolyn Reed, Beth Story, Frank from Germany, I wrote down. Rachel Lynch, Mark, I wrote down, and Maddie Hinch. So if you go back maybe quarter of a century, that would be the sort of group that I'd put in there as being influential. And they've all moved in different ways, and they all have a variety of memories that I've got implanted in my brain, you know, that I can see, and I think have, you know, helped the game to kind of develop, or the game within a game. You asked at the beginning, or maybe you didn't, maybe you're yet to ask it, and so I won't preempt the question.
No.
It's kind of a game within a game, isn't it?
I think Cortez actually was on the bench for quite a lot behind your Fraser for quite a long time.
Well, he could answer that.
Learning the trade, and
It wasn't.
yeah. No.
It was behind Bernardino Herrera.
I stand corrected. I should know that. I was next to the bench.
Herrera was probably on the bench behind Jeff Fraser, but not Cortez. Cortez is too young.
Okay. I thought he's about your age, Jimmy. No.
Huh?
I thought he's about the same age as you.
Kiko's younger than me. Kiko actually came in 2004.
I'll ask you a question of both of you guys. After what you spoke about, Louis, concerning the game speeded up and therefore you need to do a lot more reaction stuff. I agree wholeheartedly with that. But I still think that when you get the keepers and Mark gets the keepers, they are not quite the finished article, but they're very good. Otherwise, they wouldn't be where they are. You wouldn't be coaching them. So I do think there's a need for people to learn the techniques when they're younger, when the game is slower, so that they come to you. I mean, ideally, you'd never have to do any technique work again because they would have learned it in their early years. Inevitably, you have to do a bit with the work that you do. But I see the speed being built on a technical base. So the international side of the coaching of goalkeepers is, as you say, much more reactive, much more speed orientated, and most importantly, match like. I hate to see drills where the ball is always fed from the same place. The goalie makes a save, it's over. Then they come back to the middle again, and you do it again. I like to play all the balls out, and I think that's what you were saying, Jimmy. You said game-like. Is that fair, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and that's the interesting thing, obviously, as we talk about, and Jimmy's spoken about it before, you're exactly right. The ones that probably come to us at that international level, if you're talking about, I think one of the questions from the crew watching was around style. And at times, yeah, a person that's going to come and start doing things maybe with me at age 20 is going to have an idea about themselves that's different to a 12-year-old. So I think that's the point that you're sort of trying to make there, Hursty. So I totally agree with that.
Yeah, and another one here, Jimmy, from you for the chat room. James Thornton is actually one of the Wales senior goalkeepers. He says, you talked about predicting the future and where the game's going to go. Like, where do you see the game going next? And, you know, in terms of changing, and how might that affect the goalkeeper?
Well, good question. I think the way, I mean, you look at the stats at the moment, I think this happened in the women's game before the men's game. There's a lot of goals conceded around, we call it the box here in Germany. So it's like the goal mouth, basically. And this is the area the goalkeeper has to control. You have to try not to give away too many rebounds in that area. And you have to decision-making, do I come out, do I stay in the goal? This is getting more and more prevalent, I think, in the top game. In the women's game, it's been like it for quite a while. There's quite a lot of attacking over the baseline and balls into the middle of the box, basically. So it's been able to read that and control that, and that's coming in the men's game as well. And I think there's some sort of stats done that 70% of the open play goals that are scored these days come from the area in the boxes. How do we develop that? How do we develop if we're going to come out and attack the ball or the player with the ball? What are the different ways you're coming out to develop? You obviously have a standing block, you have a sliding block, you have your double stack, all these different things. And it's a decision making, how to improve that. Corners, obviously, as well. Corner defense is changing all the time. The roles of the goalkeeper there is also massive. You see all the goalies this day, they stand so far to the right. I mean, Maddie stands and Ash as well. They stand halfway between the penalty spot and the near post, basically. They're defending a really small area. So that's changing. I don't know if it's just a hunch of mine or a feeling, but I think the hit corner is going to come back at some stage as well. Is what I think. If you actually,
it's a lost skill, isn't it? Hitting a corner.
Yeah,
Keir and I were talking about this last week.
Yeah.
So Keir and I were talking about this last week, and it was almost like the hit is coming back into the game, and there's almost, it feels like it's almost like a lost generation of goalkeepers that don't know how to go down a corner properly.
Well, there's so many field players that can't hit a ball these days. It's terrible.
So I don't know how you guys. So like I say, it's almost like there's a generation of goalkeepers that hasn't been taught how to go down at a corner properly. I don't know how that kind of is.
That was my bread and butter defense. I was laying down at corners when I was like 14, 15 years old.
Well, the big question is, do you have to lay down at the corner?
Do you have to? I think if you've got someone that can hit the ball nicely into the bottom right corner as you look at the goal, and I think or the stick side as well, and I think you have to. I think with these carbon sticks they're using these days, it's carbon Kevlar sticks. They hit the ball so hard. I'm sure the number one runner's not going to want a chance down a hit like he does a flick either. So I think the goal's going to be a bit more open. It's a bit different to back in the day, obviously, because the ball was stopped like 3 or 4 meters inside the circle, so you didn't have the time to react. Whether you have the time to react these days to a hit from the top of the circle, not sure, because I've not seen enough of it, to be honest, to answer that. But you got in these days, back in those days, no one ever did deflections of corners. I mean, so you can have a slap for a deflection these days. You can also do a hit for a deflection. I have no idea, to be honest, whether you have to. Hurst is a good question. It was interesting what Hursty said about, and I talked to the goalies about this quite a lot, is the drag flick came in quite towards the end of my career, and we struggled with it at the start. We really struggled. But a hit corner was difficult to score against my generation because we had a lot of experience with it. Hurst would have the same feeling probably. These days, it's completely the other way around. if I look at young guys these days, I'd never teach a kid to lay down at a corner anyway. After a certain age, probably after 16 years old or something, I'd consider doing it with goalies, but not with little kids. But they have no problems with flicked corners because that's all they've ever seen. If you hit a corner against them, they got no idea how to save it, whether it's standing up or laying down, whatever. Because, like I said, for them it's totally new. So that's why I think at some stage it's going to come back. And we had last week training camp with a German women's team. We had 4 test games against India, and the Indians hit a penalty corner, slip hit, and it took our goalie completely by surprise. She didn't know what to do. She saved it, but it was just, wow. Chippy, I'm sorry. It was lucky.
Yeah. Just for anyone who's listening as a coach, or especially involved with junior goalkeepers, I see a lot of teenagers like logging at corners, but in practice just lying on the ground and having the ball hit at them. I think for me, there's a question about whether you need to log a junior hockey, but I think with logging, one of the hardest things is actually getting the timing right. It's not just a case of hitting the deck. And picking up on those visual cues and the visual indicators if you're a goalkeeper, and learning what that looks like from behind the visor. So if anyone listening who's a coach who's working with junior goalkeepers, I would really recommend that you have a look at not just lying the keeper down, but also looking at how they get from standing to that lying down position, because that timing is really important. You go down too late or too early, you go down when the ball's flicked, and there's lots of variables. So just bear that in mind if you're a junior coach and you're listening. I think that's really still quite a hard skill to get right at a good level.
I think we talked about this, Keir, didn't we? That sort of, if you go down, it's the control of the leg guards, because it suddenly hits off the leg guard and it's just pinging back into that area that Jimi was talking about, that area just in front of the goal. So there is the getting down, but then it's the, how do you angle your legs so that actually the ball doesn't ping back towards the P spot. I don't know if anyone wants to sort of chime in on that.
That's what we used to coach. That's exactly what we used to coach, and using the hand, to trap the ball even in front of the knees almost sometimes. Much more easy in the women's game at the time than it was in the men's because of the speed of the hit, obviously. But Caroline Reid, you go back to those years, and she was ace at lying down at a corner and trapping the ball with her hand anywhere between her head and her knees. And she stopped it, and in came the defender to sweep it away. But that's
Message from Simon Mason. Hicko, this Jay Stacey, 1998 World Cup, top goal scorer, 11 goals, all from the top of the D, wallop. He hit it pretty hard.
Scored one against Mace as well. I was there watching.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, Keir, I think the 3 things that I'd highlight from what Jimi and Hursty were also talking about, plus yourselves, for me, there's 3 things that affect goalkeepers and where goalkeeping is going and where it's been in the past. And the first thing that I'd highlight is equipment. Hursty touched on it. The first time you got the foam kickers, you could suddenly start to do different things than before. So in those sort of terms, suddenly what you tried to coach as a goalkeeper or what you might do as a goalkeeper changed. And that's an iterative process, and that will happen over time. I think style of play, and that's what Jimi has sort of touched on in terms of the drag flicking becoming a really popular part of the game. And Jay, as hard as he could hit the ball, that element sort of going out of it. I don't know if Mace is suggesting that Jay could possibly make, a comeback. That's a possibility. And that'd touch on maybe the last bit, and that'd be rules. Both Jimi, Hursty and yourselves would probably remember the days where you could have a player come onto the field purely for penalty corners. So they became almost, an attacking weapon, but they wouldn't play the rest of the game. Now, they didn't take a lot of time to change in our sport. However, it's a really good illustration of how the rules and how they change in hockey can also then adjust what goalkeepers need to look at. I think about the dotted line sort of around 5 yards from the circle. Now, that's sort of changed what goalkeepers do. So for me, equipment, the style of play and the rules, what those will be into the future, that could really change what goalkeeping looks like.
I can remember seeing Dave Matthews' stick and Quans Brown's stick when they came back from Holland with that massive 50mm bow. And that soon went. And then obviously stick manufacturers find different ways of getting the bow lower down the stick and, getting around that. I think that made a big difference as well. And actually, it reminds me of Hurst. He actually put me into a match many years ago playing. There was a charity match, Great Britain 88 against Holland 1992 at East Grinstead. And I think I'd just been dropped by the England junior team. And I think to cheer me up, Hurst gave me a game playing for Holland 92 with Bovelander, Stefan Vane. Wow. And that was Bovelander warming me up was nice. Hit it from 10 yards away with about 4 balls. First kick, bosh. He hit it pretty hard, didn't he, Hursty?
He did. What was the score, Keir?
I think we lost 5-4. I didn't play very well, but great experience. Just want to move it on slightly because we've got a few things to get through. Just very quickly, I want to touch on who you guys looked up to when you were growing up. And I know for me, Jimi was someone I related to because he wasn't massive. I remember reading Hockey Sport and seeing Jimi play for Havant and thinking, actually, he's an international goalie and he's not six. He might say 6 foot, but I never think he was being that tall. No, so I thought, you can be a top goalkeeper without being 6'6" and in that Mason sort of mold. And I remember thinking, that was my first thing. And then, lucky enough, got to play against Jimi several times. And actually, I was really loved watching Jimi play growing up. And then obviously Ronald Janssen, who I've got his shirt, which I'm very proud of that. So, who did you guys and Allan? You've not said much. Al, who did you look up to as you were growing up?
I'm just trying to think. I think the first person I looked up to was probably my dad because he was a goalkeeper as well. So I know that Jim, you've met Bigger Al before. He was one I kind of looked up to. We used to play on blaze pitches and stuff. And I just watch him scrambling about, and that style kind of gets back to that sort of question of style, doesn't it? And sort of watching him rolling about the circle, just trying to get in the way of it. I just received a message from Jeej. I think if you remember him, Jim, he's saying say Jeej. I would maybe say Jeej, but he was an influence. I think he kind of came and did a couple of coaching sessions with us, and you sort of listened to what they're saying, and so I got right now. I've listened to this coach, and I want to go and see them play, and you do see these sort of influences, and I think later on, probably one of the biggest influences was McGregor. Just Hursty talking about Vogel's having been Janssen's number 2. I mean, I spent most of my international career watching Ali play, which. It was a fairly decent seat to watch him play from, and you sort of I'll get my chance soon. But actually, watching him play, you take a lot of things from that. And you go right. Well, I can apply that into my own game. I can make that work, or you can have some sort of little adaptation of a style of save. So I'd say probably Ali was one of my biggest influences when I was watching or playing, and I tried to take a lot of the times that we'd spent together, training together, playing together, and then try and not replicate, because you don't. I think so Jimmy's right. You can't you got to be your own individual, don't you, in the goal? But actually, you can take bits and pieces of other goalkeepers' games, and you can apply it into your own style.
I think
I'm interested who you look up to,
because I'll forget it otherwise. It's about Ali McGregor, and this is the psychological side of international goalkeeping in a sense. So Ali achieved almost a perfect tournament at the 2008 Olympics when he was outstanding for GB, and he reached, what I call the nirvana of international keeping. where it all goes right for a period of 2 weeks and the coach has no intervention whatsoever, because I think one of you said earlier that you've done your work in the build-up. You know, they're in the tournament, it's up to them. And he was outstanding in that particular tournament. And I just thought, as you mentioned him, I ought to say that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Hurst, you'll be pleased to know that Ali's now providing those sort of great sort of ideas to our next generation over here in GB too.
I knew that. That's great.
You know, Keir, for me, it's a really interesting one. It resonates what Allan's just said to me, and it highlights one of the importance of having local heroes. You know, for context, in my situation, I'm from the Northern Territory of Australia, so an area with very low population, although a large sort of landmass area. So it's also an age before the internet, obviously, and the things that we're doing sort of tonight. So you think about people that influence you, and for me, the most important things, and it still needs to be with our hockey clubs today, are the people that you can touch and that you can see. So for me, it was 3 goalkeepers that I saw growing up in the Northern Territory. Did they ever play for Australia? No, they didn't. Did they? Were they going to be talked about in some of the revered terms that are talked about tonight, which I think is fantastic, and we also need to reflect that. They weren't, but for me, they were so important because they were people that I saw each week. So Michael Hewlett, Peter Keebles, Paul Griffiths, these are 3 guys that, unless you're from the Northern Territory, you probably don't know. So that's another thing that I always sort of talk about. It's really good to talk about who are our world-renowned goalkeepers and how they influence people, but never to forget that for many of our younger goalkeepers, that's going to be their first touch point, and the importance of that and realising that value within our clubs and our communities.
No, I like that. Really important. A lot of the people listening will resonate with that. And if you're a junior goalie, you might be looking up to like your first 11 goalkeepers and going and watching the club's top team on a weekend. I think that kind of is really important. Were you going to speak then, Jim?
I was going to say the people who influenced me the most, or people I looked up to the most. Ian Taylor was the first one. I think from my side, he come obviously towards the end of his career came the foam kickers, the moon boots, hasn't the moon boots, and I think he kind of revolutionised the goalkeeping, or how I saw it, the way goalkeepers worked back in those days. I mean, the save clear was developed by the British goalkeepers, English goalkeepers. Hurst was one of those, obviously. And not stopping the ball and clearing it away with a stick and this kind of stuff, which the continental goalkeepers still used up until the late 80s, I think. And they developed that, and Taylor was a big thing. And obviously, I was just starting out. I started playing in '86, and he was obviously the #1 goalie at the time, and probably the best goalie in the world. Definitely the best goalie in the world. So he was obviously someone you look up to straight away. Hursty was my indoor person to go to. Hursty was the best indoor goalie in the world. He was an amazing indoor goalkeeper. He was very active. He was doing a lot of diving, which I liked as well, because I come from a football background. I was a football goalie before I was a hockey goalie. I was too small for football, unfortunately. I was told that by every single club I trained with and played with. I had a different opinion, but and I transferred to hockey. So some of my football influences, obviously diving around in the big goal, carried over into hockey. So Hursty had an influence on me there as well in the indoor game. Sean Rowlands was the #1 at Havant back in the day, England GB #1. I was a mini Sean Rowlands for quite a few years, to be honest. And I think it's important that young goalkeepers have this role model that they look up to. And like Hickey said, I'll call you Mark instead. I'll keep it official. As Mark said, it doesn't have to be on the international stage. It could be on the club stage. And I think it's important as a young goalkeeper, and I'm talking like when you're just starting out, to have this role model in your club, because it's someone you see regularly, someone you see on a weekly basis, someone you can get real close up to, not like an international person you see on a TV, whatever. I think it's important. I used to have everything the same as Sean Rowlands. I had exactly the same kit. I wore exactly the same shoes. I tried to play like him. I just copied him when he was about 3 foot taller than I was. He had a bit different ability than I did. When I was at the time England #16 goalkeeper, he was the GB #1. But he was definitely a role model for me for quite a few years. And then you learn to develop your own game after that, obviously taking influences either from your own ideas from different sports also, and also from international goalies from around the world. I mean, for me, Janssen was one of my big heroes. Porn star, porno as he was called on the international circuit, because of his big curly locks and his fat belly. But he was under pressure. He was absolutely amazing. He was all in the big games. He was a big game player, and he pulled it out of the bag. He had the luck that he played in a very strong Dutch team during a very strong Dutch period where they won absolutely everything. They wiped the floor of everybody basically. But he was one of the reasons because of that. And then I played against him club level as well in the European Cups when he played for Den Bosch and I played for Canuck. And he was also outstanding then. He was just someone who played well. He was a very arrogant man, but he actually put his displays on the big stage were really good, I have to say. But only towards the end of his career. At the start of his career, they weren't as good as towards the end. The same with the Vogels as well, I think, for Holland. He was also, towards the end of his career, very good. And it's like Hurst said, it's about learning the trade, obviously. And someone who Mace was actually at the breaks the mold a little bit there, because Mace at the beginning of his career, when he played in the '94 World Cup, was outstanding and made it into the World 11. I think he was only 22 at the time, I think, 21, 22. It was pretty good going, to be fair. But they would have been my heroes. So, as I say, Taylor at the start, he's the one that kind of inspired me to play. That was a change from football to hockey. Hursty was my indoor inspiration. My growing up inspiration was my club #1 goalkeeper, Sean Rowlands. I was lucky enough to play in a really good club team. We were national champions 3 times at Havant when I was a kid. And Sean Rowlands was an amazing goalkeeper and a great athlete as well. And he taught me a lot about athletics. He was very much into doing plyometrics and this kind of stuff and sprint training and footwork training. That was kind of an inspiration for me as well. And then on the international stage would have been Janssen was the guy that I looked up to be honest, because he was small. And he was just a big game player. He was someone who pulled it out of the bag in the moment. That's, for me, it's quite important when you they talk about something here in Germany called Ausstrahlung. This means your aura. This is like this thing about you when you go on the pitch. And there's some goalies that don't have that, and some goalies that do. And some goalies it just oozes out of them. And Janssen had that. I think, to be honest, he was just one of the guys when you played against him, you just knew he was going to play well. And I think that has a big influence on the forwards that you play against as well. So. If
you look at football as well, I think a lot of I'm a big football fan. I go to watch a match and I just look at the goalie. I don't even watch the game. So in the Premier League, there's a lot of the best keepers in the Premier League have been the guys, 30 plus, who just know their game. They're consistent. They make a mistake and they're old enough and wise enough to know that it's not, it's not the end of the match. They can get their head around it quickly. In football terms, people like Peter Cech, who went on forever. Schmeichel wasn't bad. David Seaman.
What?
Brad Friedel.
David Seaman?
Hang on, I'm an Arsenal fan. Give me that one, Jim.
The only thing he had was a good moustache.
Brad
good
Friedel.
Good ponytail for a bit as well.
No, mate. Not unless
I thought you were wearing a David Seaman tash there, no?
The tash was good.
I mean, even now, a lot of the good best keepers are the guys who are a bit older and wiser, and it just brings me on to the next point about psychology and keeping your head together during the game. And I know with Wales we do a lot of talking about this, and just sort of knowing yourself and knowing how to manage yourself on the pitch. I know Maddie's done stuff like having the words written on a drinks bottle, and I know a lot of junior keepers around the country with the words written on their bottle and that kind of stuff. I just wondered whether you guys had any sort of little mechanisms or little almost like reset systems that you used back in the day when you were playing, or whether you were just old school in the sense that you just had to refocus and get back on the game. I'll go to Hickman first for that one.
Yeah, I mean it's a really good question, and it's obviously a massively important part of the game. You might call the technical words for it error recovery, and probably what Jimi sort of referred to in speaking about Janssen as one of the people that he sort of looked up to. I'm sure that he also had goals scored against him that he probably didn't want. What he obviously had was a very good method of recovering from any sort of error. And that's going to be different for all sort of goalkeepers. You have those fortunate people that in some ways can't remember the last 30 seconds, life's moved on and they're only sort of looking forward. And then we have other people that maybe their natural sort of trait is to look back. So your method for dealing with that is probably going to be a bit dependent on the type of person that you are. You know, if you're asking me to reflect on myself, I think it's an area that I was pretty poor with, in terms of, you know, maybe I'm someone that tended to think a little bit too much about what had happened rather than what it sort of was going to happen going into the future. So it wasn't an area that we had a massive amount of sort of work in, and I suppose the easiest way to sort of look at it, the best advice that I was given was always around sort of flushing the toilet. So that was an analogy that I would sort of use, sometimes with great effect and sometimes not with so sort of much effect. But I'd agree that the ability to do that and your mechanisms for that's really important.
Interesting.
Sometimes you have to flush it twice, don't you?
Jimi, is that part of the game you found difficult, or you were quite comfortable with that?
At times, I had phases where I was mentally very strong, and phases where I was mentally not so strong. Let's say. I think the more belief you have in yourself, the easier it is to get over these things. Which is why I think someone like Janssen didn't have a problem with it, because he had a lot of self-belief. That's for sure. Whether it was right or wrong, he had a lot of self-belief, and I think it's then easier to get over it. And something I was always told from a young age, and I still teach the goalkeepers that these days, is when you let in a goal, you analyze it. Okay, you think about is it my fault? Is it not my fault? Okay, doesn't matter if it's my fault or not. What could I have done to save that goal? Was there anything I could have done better? Is there anything I could have said to the defenders to do it better? You've only got a few seconds to do this, obviously, in a game before the game restarts again. International's a bit different these days with the 40-second break between the goals. But you have to mentally analyze it, think if there's anything you could have done better. Yes, no, yes, and you try and put that into action the next time it happens. No, we just forget about it and move on. But not every goal is savable. I actually had problems during the game if I made a mistake. Was not so much of a problem for me. I was quite good at getting over that, to be honest. It doesn't always work 100%. Obviously, you have off days. I wasn't that bad at getting over that. My problem was if I made a big mistake, then it would have an effect on my game for the next 3 or 4 weeks. I mean, I remember at the 2002 World Cup, we lost the first crossover. We just missed out in the semi-finals, I think. We were third in the group, I think. And we played against Argentina. And funny enough, this John talking about going the wrong way corners. Golden goal. We lost 2-1, and Jorge Lombi sent me the wrong way at a corner. The reception was really good, but this is something I teach my goalies never to go the wrong way at the corner. Get beat for speed, yeah, but don't get beat for deception. And he sent me the wrong way, and I went back to Canuck afterwards to the league, and the next 3 or 4 weekends, I went the wrong way at every single corner, even against guys that normally I'd save the balls with my eyes closed. I went the wrong way, which obviously had a big mental effect on me, and I ended up getting dropped out of the Canuck. I was like the England #1 and got dropped out of the Canuck team, and luckily we had James Fair as the #2 goalkeeper. He wasn't too bad either. But it did me good to take a break. It took me about 5 weeks to get over it, to be honest. And yeah, that was during the game. Never really had a problem. I was taught from an early age, just come from Sean Rowlands, that after every goal you can see whether it's a mistake or not a mistake, you have to show your presence again on the pitch, and that comes through loud talking. The team needs to be supported. Your team needs to know you're there. They need to know the rocks behind them still, whether they make a mistake or not. Then you analyse it, you put it to bed, you move on, and you bring yourself back into the game through talking. And that's something I teach the young goalies over here as well. For me, it's really important to have this presence. There's this Ausstrahlung I was talking about in Germany, this presence basically, and that you bring yourself into the game and keep yourself in the game mentally through talking. And I think that's an extremely important part. As soon as you start talking about things, organising defence, and the past is gone, you're looking into the future again, which is what Hickey was on about. And it gets you away from dwelling on this mistake, I think, or dwelling on a goal in general, to be honest. But yeah, for me, during the game was difficult, but in phases, make a mistake is a big part, because in the World Cup, obviously, letting a goal out, getting sent the wrong way, it plays on your mind a little bit, and it really affected my game afterwards for a little while.
So you can generate
the conversations going. Let Hurst speak. Come on, Grandad.
I used to have keywords, and I still use them today. So, watch the ball, because I found that changed my focus from dwelling on what had just happened to something that was about to happen. So, watch the ball was a pretty good overall summary of what goalkeeper coaching is all about, really, isn't it? These days, teach your goalies to watch the ball, they'll save more than if they don't. And it's surprising, isn't it, how many goalkeepers don't watch the ball. They don't move their head towards it, they don't move their eyes towards it. So, but the point is, I think, change the focus, take your mind off what's just happened. Error correction was what you said, Mark, I think, wasn't it? Was that were they the two words?
Error recovery, but I'll give you error and Hursty.
Error recovery. I mean, you can't say error recovery. You could say anything, I suppose, to change the focus. But I like to think that if you watch the ball, you've got a good chance of saving the next one. Sorry, I interrupted, Keir.
No, sorry, Hursty. You are the main man. I'll just shut up. I basically was just going to add. In fact, we'll move on slightly. Just conscious of time. This is the big question that Allan and I have been talking about a lot, and I know if Danny Newcomb's listening, we've been talking about that with Wales a lot as well, about the goalkeeper being a part of the team, but also like to what extent is a goalkeeper an individual within the team as well? Because it's obviously a different position, different mindset. Very often, a different type of person is a goalkeeper. And I know at club level, especially, we'll have some quirky people online tonight who are goalies. You know, the goalies who love the bright colours, who are a little bit crazy, who love that kind of what I'd call the traditional stereotype of a goalkeeper. So, you know, I know Jimmy's probably a good person to start us on this one about being an individual. And how does that look in a team setting, Jim?
You are an individual as a goalkeeper, definitely, because you're playing a game within a game. Basically, is the way I look at it. You're detached from the game. You're not getting any ball contact. I mean, the players are getting subbed on, subbed off these days the whole time with the interchanging. The ball gets moved around the pitch. I mean, the tactics these days are about playing the ball across the back, through the midfield, transfer, and all this kind of stuff. And you're just stood at the back waiting for something to happen. I mean, the only way you're involved in the game is through talking and communicating and organising. You can obviously get your shots to save as well at some point. During the trainings, I mean, the goalkeepers always have extra trainings. You don't always see the field players have an extra training, so it is a totally different role for me. It's mentally a different role as well, not just physically. Physically, you have a different role because you don't run. I mean, the field players run, so they need other things, another sort of athletic training or athletic abilities than a goalkeeper. So that's different as well. And the other thing is you're playing for one position. I mean, if you're having a squad of 18, let's say you take to a tournament 18 or 16 players and 2 goalies, you're playing one goalie is going to play. I mean, at the Olympics, there's only one goalie, so you're fighting for this one position, whereas a field player is fighting for 15, 16, 17 positions. I know some are defenders, midfielders, whatever, but even so, you're fighting for a bigger squad. And as a goalkeeper, you're fighting for one position, so it is totally different. It's interesting that you were saying earlier, Keir, before we went online, about trying to build a goalkeeper community. I think that's one of the things, is what Hickey was saying earlier as well. This is what I'm doing a lot in Germany. I'm trying to get the goalkeepers within the squad, so they're fighting against each other, but they're pushing each other, they're encouraging each other, and they're learning from each other as well. And there's some goalkeeper relationships within the team are not very good, obviously, and that makes the coach's role much more difficult. Trying to coach a group of 3 goalies that can't stand each other, you're trying to coach them every day in a training camp is much more difficult than if you've got 3 guys that get on really well together. But yeah, going back to the question, the role of the goalkeeper is totally different to the field player. They're totally different from abilities, from athletic, from mental, from everything, I think. And you are on the end of a practice and not really involved in a practice. You're still at the back of the game, so you're detached from it. So I think it's a totally different role, to be honest. And I think the field players have to accept that. The goalies accept it and know it already. I think most coaches accept that as well. And I can't say that I've ever worked with an top international coach that's ever not thought that a goalkeeper role is totally different to a field player role within the team. You're still part of the team, don't get me wrong. I mean, I was also quite a loud, brash sort of person when I was younger, as you probably know, Keir.
No.
But I was still, would like to think that I was a good teammate. I was still part of the team and I was still involved in everything. But during the trainings and during the games, you have a different kind of role. I think you have a different kind of responsibility as well. But yeah, you're definitely a big part of the team. But you're within the team, if you know what I mean. You understand what I mean?
Love it, yeah. Hicko, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, agree with what Jimmy's sort of saying there, and there'd probably be one element that I'd add to it that he touched on. While the role is different, I think it's important to look at, maybe take a step back and say, why do we play sport? Why do we get involved in hockey? Why do we get involved in goalkeeping? So if you're in a situation, try to understand that for the goalkeeper, because that may be different for someone. I think, a personal belief is that at our base, we're all social creatures. So we crave interaction with other people. Now, that could be different for different people, but it's really important to understand the level of social interaction that maybe someone's really looking for, because in general, that will be one of the reasons that you've chosen the position, that you're involved in the sport. So what does that mean? If you've got someone that really craves that social interaction and that sort of meaningfulness is driven by that, you don't want to be in a situation, and you don't want to create an environment with a team, whether it's with your international team or your club team, where your goalkeeper can't feel the love to give it, a very sort of corny sort of look to it. And I think that's really important in terms of encouraging our goalkeepers, keeping them involved in the game, making sure that not only are they good goalkeepers, but hopefully later on in life, they get interested in goalkeeping coaching too.
Hursty?
Well, I can't really add to that. I think it's been, it's spot on. There's a challenge, though, isn't it, for a keeper, because they are a separate part of the game, but they've got to be part of the whole, and the whole is the team, as Mark said. So it's a challenge, and trying to manage that for individuals is sometimes hard, I think, particularly as they're growing up. So part of the coach's role is to help them become a good team person as well as an individual within a separate part of the game to a large extent. They're the ones in the funny gear. Nobody else is.
Kind of begs the question at club level then, if the coach is listening, at club level, how important is like the personality of the person, almost versus how good that goalkeeper is? That you've got to have the right person in the team. I know, especially lower down the levels, coaches might have 2 goalkeepers. Like you got goalkeeper number 1, who's maybe an all right goalie, but a great guy and gets behind people, very committed. And you might have goalkeeper number 2, who's, maybe not such a great guy for the team, but he might be the better goalkeeper. I know this is probably something that a lot of coaches face up and down the country when they're picking their teams. Like, how far do we take it in terms of personality and making that person fit in the team? Dickie, you want to answer that?
I think with that one, I think probably the role of the coach is then to then kind of curb that. You've got a goalkeeper who's maybe technically absolutely brilliant, but not a great teammate. I think as a coach, you're then trying to steer them more towards sort of being part of the team. I think that's really important because, as we sort of said earlier, you want that rock at the back, really, don't you? You want that someone you can rely on to make the saves. If that person is the better goalkeeper, then it's the job of the coach then to try and, as much as possible, integrate them within the sort of the defensive system, the bigger part of the team. We were talking about this. We had this conversation, didn't we, a couple of weeks ago? And my point was that I think, and it's been made there, that the goalkeeper is part of the we, as in the bigger team, but they are a me in the sense of the position. I just think that the role of the individual, it depends on the game. Sometimes you are the big part of the machine, and sometimes you're just another one of the small cogs that helps the machine roll along. I think it depends on the game, and it depends on your involvement. So I think you kind of flip between being the we as part of the team and then me as the individual, because there are going to be times where you as an individual, you are going to be up against it. You're going to have to make X amount of saves in a game in order to keep your team in the game. So the focus does come to you as an individual at times. But then there's other times where you're going to, as Jimi said, you're just going to be watching the game and all you're going to do is talk, waiting for that bit of action. So I think we are in quite a unique position that sometimes we will be the main player and sometimes we'll not be. We'll be a spectator for most of it.
Got a nice question here from Nicole Marks, who plays for the EDP. Very nice young lady who Alan and I both know, and of course Hurst as well. She says, you mentioned the... sorry?
And Hickle.
Yeah, sorry, Hickle knows her. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
You mentioned about the styles, really. Nicole says, if you could pick certain elements of a goalkeeper to make a super goalkeeper, which pieces would you pick from where? So I take from that in terms of, she said about the nations. So which nations are best at what? And what pieces would you pick from other countries to make the perfect goalkeeper? Interesting question. A very Nicole question, that. Hello, Nicole, if you listen, or you're listening, you're online. Jimi, is there any bits that you've, obviously every coach, well-known fact, every coach takes things from other people and you see stuff you like and you make it your own and you put your twist on it. Mm-hmm. But in terms of goalie attributes, are any things, if you think of an English goalkeeper, what is English goalkeeping good at and what do you take from that? Allan and I are always talking about styles, and I've had quite a lot of chats with Steve Bayer recently about what he does in Belgium, and that's nothing like what he's been done in England, as far as I can see. It probably sounds a bit more like what you're doing. So, which countries are best at what?
I think personally, for me, for my style, I think the Dutch have the nicest technique. I think it's not the best. It looks the nicest, but I'm not sure it's actually the most. I just say this, God, my English is getting so bad, man. I've been living here for 18 years in Germany. If I'm talking German the whole time, my English is getting terrible.
Aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah, it looks good on the eye, but it's not actually very successful, I don't think. And it's not actually very transferable into the game these days. In the Dutch goalkeeping training, most of it's done with a very slow ball speed. There's a lot of touching, timing, and this kind of stuff. And they move really nice. They look good in the kit as well, I think. It was always a style I tried to copy when I was growing up. I always thought they looked nice. As I said, I don't think it's actually the most effective. Van Ass has got the best stick in hand defense in the world, I think, at the moment. His hand speed is incredibly quick and his hand-eye coordination is amazing. You watch him during a warm-up before a game. He has Neddy, who's a former South African international player. He hammers the ball at him for like 9 meters, stick side high, and he saves like 19 out of 20. It's unbelievable. Clack, 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 clack. And he's got this. He does a lot of eye training. A lot of eye training. It's like a computer program you use, and you do it about 2 hours every night. It takes up a lot of time, but it is extremely effective. Extremely effective. And there's something eye tracking. What Hursty was talking about earlier as well. So I'm getting sidelined a bit here. There's eye track. What are the eyes looking at a corner? this is something that I'm trying to look into in Germany at the moment, the national team goalies, and there's actually glasses you can get. They cost about 15 grand a pair. They're called eye tracking glasses, and they actually track the eyes exactly where they're looking and what they're focusing on in certain situations. Is what I'm trying to get hold of some here in Germany. It's actually very difficult to get ones that are good enough for goalies. Every time they dive and land on the floor, they need to be recalibrated. So they're no good for goalkeeping. So we're trying to look into get some over here. But going back to your questions, I think the Australians have a very individual technique, I think, to be fair. I mean, they try and do everything in standing. You don't see an Australian goalie dive. You don't see an Australian goalie slide. Very, very rarely. Although I've seen it trained on Australian goalkeeping videos with that they slide. But if you watch them at corners, they try and save the corners always in standing, and Hickman would have a better idea than that. That's my judgment on the situation. As I say, I think the Dutch have got a very pleasing to the eye technique and the way they move. But I'm not sure it's the most effective these days because the game's got too fast for the techniques, I think, to be fair.
Quite relaxed style, isn't it? Dutch.
Yeah, very. That's what I mean. It's all, but the goalkeeping training is exactly the same. That's how they train as well. I think Van Asch has got the best hand and stick defense, the best hand and eye coordination. I think in England we used to have very good corner defense when it was laying down back in the day. I'm not sure we actually went along with the times very well when it moved to flicking. I think, to be fair, I think there's had a lot to do with the kit we used. We changed very late to using foam gloves because they weren't allowed in England. I mean, I used to wear the foam leg guards and kickers, but still use leather gloves, which means you don't save anything with the right hand. We also used indoor sticks for a long time, playing outdoor hockey, and that's on the continent. They've always used field sticks. And as soon as I moved to wearing a foam glove and an outdoor stick, and my hand and stick coordination and defense got a lot better. They helped me at corners as well. And I remember saying to Hursty, I think it was around about 2002, and I said, well, 2001, that I wanted to start using my right hand a lot more and stop reaching over with the left hand. And just use the right hand on this side and the left hand on the other side. And then I wanted to bring in the indoor, because the game was getting more based around the front of the goal. I wanted to bring in what we used in indoor, which was sprinting out of the corners and then sliding at a goal shot, which is something Hurst used to do when he was an indoor goalie. And I wanted to bring that into the outdoor game. And you see all the goalies do it these days. I mean, that was something that I tried to bring into my game back in those days. But I think the Aussies are good at shot stopping. I think because they stay to the lights down the line, they do everything on their feet, so they don't have the decision-making process they have to go through. Is it diving? Is it standing on your feet? And they also got very good forwards, and guys are going to hit the ball very well, so they're training against it all the time. I think they're very good with that. As I say, the Dutch with their technique looks very nice, but I don't think it's very effective. Although Vogels used to do it very well, but I say he stopped playing how long ago? That was 10 years ago, and the game's changed a lot in that time. Yeah, that would be mine.
Yeah, Hicko, what do you reckon?
I mean, Jimi's filled, I think, in terms of a broad overview. And I think the thing that I'd take from that, if I was listening to Jimi, if I was Nicole at home, and obviously working hard to improve her game, is that there's a wide range of things that can make a goalkeeper good. So the one thing that I'd add is that the goalkeepers that I look for or that I think are playing well, they have a belief in what they're doing, that it's the right thing to do. So what does that mean? I'm sure with Jimi in Germany, with the boys that he's got there, yes, there is an element of trying to do things. There's an element of exploring your boundaries, but overall, you're very confident in your approach. Because if you have that confidence, then it's amazing that you can get by a lot of different approaches in terms of being successful. If we think about international goalkeepers, they touch the ball 5, 7, 8 times in a match. So we're not talking about a lot of things. So the number one thing that you need is that the thing that you're doing is fantastic and it's going to work.
Like that. Hurst, anything to add on that one?
Finally, I'll go back to what I said earlier, watch the ball. And I would say that it's really, really hard to pick, for me anyway, to pick out something from a country here and something from a country there, because the best keepers I've seen, you wouldn't say they were typical necessarily of the country that they played in, if that makes sense. They were more keepers. You know, they kept a little white. This is a Mason comment, by the way, Simon. They kept the little white thing out of the big rectangular thing more than somebody else did. You know, I mean, and that's really what you're looking for. So I think Jimmy's really answered the question very, very well. Nicole's question, which was quite specific about what you take from each country, I think it's very hard. He did it very well. But I'm not sure I could. Hence my overall statement. That is, you know, watch the ball. And if you watch the ball, you never sit on your ass.
Yeah, that's
cool.
The
The goalkeepers that fall back and they don't stretch to the corners are the ones that don't watch the ball. Yeah, so it all comes back there for me.
I remember when I was a teenager going down to Basingstoke on an evening to watch Australia against England or GB, and I think it was a real heavy
9-1, I think it was.
Yeah, I'd say 9 or 10-1. A lot of short corners got bashed.
I think Mason played the first half and let 5 in, or 4.
Second half.
May have been 10. They let the same number of goals in, half and half.
And I met Lachlan Dreyer then through Neil Mallet, the Greys connection there. I always thought, you know, the Aussie goalies kind of quite good at just staying in the contest, not overcommitting, kind of just being quite secure and making sound decisions by being pretty much in the cage, as Quan would say.
He didn't have a lot to do that night, by the way.
Were you there, Hicko? You would have been there for that?
No, I can't remember ever beating GB 10-1, so certainly. No chance. I don't know what year that was, but yeah, Lockie obviously was a fantastic goalkeeper.
Great. Quick question. I know we're running out of time, so I just want to rush through quickly, guys. Dominic Wright. Hello, Dom. Hurst knows Dom as well, I believe. Dom asks, especially while defending goalkeeper as well as watching the ball, but also takes the role of the quarterback. So it's goalkeeping a bit like being a quarterback, being the guy at the back, dictating the play and being the main voice. Do we like that, guys? Do we like a big booming voice controlling it, or you can sometimes, especially at club level, you can kind of talk too much? I guess it becomes noise.
I think, I'll butt in there and say something. This is something I'm very passionate about. You shouldn't just text like a non-stop Duracell bunny at the back of the game. Otherwise, people just switch off. You have to say, you have to give a command. They have to be specific commands. They need to be loud. They need to be dominant. They don't need to be panicky. Definitely not. It needs to be a commanding, calm voice. I think goalies that just talk incessantly, non-stop, then the defense don't listen. It goes in one ear and out the other. It's just like having it in your ear the whole time. I think if you actually say it in a commanding way and in a calm but dominating way, then I think that you get the best results there, obviously. And the most important thing that you're in the goal for is to stop the ball going in the goals. To dictating what the players do with the ball is not your job.
Yes,
you can help them when they're being pressed, to give them options to get the ball out when you're building up from the back. But it's not your job to dictate the way like a quarterback and dictate the way the team plays. I mean, your main job, your main focus is when your team don't have the ball, not when your team do have the ball. So,
yeah. I think for young goalkeepers listening, calling proactively is really important. Not giving your defence and team time to actually respond to what you've asked them to do. So trying to get the calls out early.
I think for me that was something probably more towards the end. I think probably after working with you, Jimmy, I think you probably just did say shut up. But then I think with more experience,
I talk a lot. Unfortunately, is the way it is.
But I think with more experience, you kind of go, well, I don't need to be talking all the time. And actually, when you reduce it, then the quality of the communication then increases. And actually, you're then able to set the defence up much more efficiently with less calls, but actually you can help then turn the ball over further up the field, and actually, you see less action. And I think it probably was you sort of said, well, maybe just think about how much you're actually talking. Do you need to be talking that much? Change it up. And it was more towards the end that I really kind of appreciated that, I think, and it saved sort of those defenders dropping off and not listening to the call or the important call. They would miss the important one because they'd just switched off by that point.
I think for young goalkeepers as well, it's important to think about the tone of your voice. Mm-hmm. I think, especially when things get important, you can raise your tone and make your general chit chat or like your reminders or your checklist stuff. We're just going through generally calling people and just changing your volume and changing your tone. And if it's more important, more urgent, upping the tone up and upping the volume a little bit. Special shout out to Hems Davis is online. Good evening, Hems. He's a very good man. Another quick question. Aaron White up in Scotland. Big Azza. Aaron asks, what other kind of skills or other sports transfer well to hockey goalkeeping? I can think of like handball, maybe. Handball goalkeeping. We've talked about football a little bit. Are there any other sports that kind of transfer well to hockey goalkeeping?
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, guys, do you want to say something on this before I butt in? I think, these days, if you break down the hockey goalkeeping game, let's say penalties, so shuffles as you call them in Britain, penalty shootouts is called here. What I'm actually working on with the goalkeepers here, if you actually look at the history of penalties, it's from an ice hockey background, and they've had penalties in ice hockey for a game that's been drawn since as long as I can remember. I'm trying to use the similar sort of principles for my goalkeepers and the techniques as well, to try and build that into their repertoire for saving penalties. I think you can actually copy that quite well, to be fair. So my wife's just entered the room here. Hello, darling.
Hello.
Handball is another one for reactions, obviously, getting in the way of things. Football goalkeeping as well for dominating this. They have the 6-yard box. Obviously, we have this kind of 5-meter circle around the goal. It used to be a bit bigger back in the day. It's getting smaller these days, I think. Judo is something I did with the Scottish goalkeepers when I was working there. I brought that into their athletic program. A lot of rolling around, there's a lot of upper body strength, there's a lot of getting down on the floor quickly, getting back up.
Any video, Jim? Any video of that?
Not of Allan, unfortunately. I've got a video of Amy Gibson doing it very well.
Not safe for work.
But as an athletic point of view, also, yeah.
Cool.
No, anything else to add to that?
Racket sports for the individual goalkeeper, so hand-eye coordination, and you can build that up with badminton, table tennis, and tennis to a certain extent. Although I like badminton myself because you move so much.
Yeah.
If somebody of squash, obviously, but
definitely
not quite as good, because if you play somebody at squash who is slightly better than you, you do a lot of running but don't hit many balls. So it's not quite easy to get the full amount out of it. So I used to like badminton, I used to like table tennis. Also, I could, keywords, watch the ball.
You don't have a ball in table tennis, in badminton.
Watch the shuttle. I won't use the other bit.
Very good.
Guys, we're just coming to the end now. I'm really conscious that we don't want to take up all of your Friday night. It's been really fantastic, getting lots of great comments and good feedback on the chat. Very quickly, I really wanted to ask this question myself. Players you played with that really inspired you, great teammates that you really got a buzz from playing with, who gave you a great sense of confidence, and the guys that really, gave you a real buzz. I mean, whilst you're thinking, I'll just mention a couple that I played with. Dave Hacker, who was a fierce competitor, not a scary man, but like had really high standards and would let you know if you weren't there. Kind of Roy Keane style, which I liked as a teenager. Quan Brown as well. I think one of the best players to play in the Premier League ever, probably. And he's only just stopped. But he's someone who sets really high standards, and he just lifts people around him with his personality. Hurst, do you want to start us off quickly?
I want Mark to start us off.
Go on, Hicko.
Well, it's always a dangerous question, this, Keir. So I don't know whether Hursty's handballed it onto me for that question. Because you always run the risk, obviously, by the names that you mention are the ones that you leave. And so you'd always couch it in the respect that there's plenty of people that I've played with that have inspired me. And in actual fact, and I think Hursty touched on it, probably Jimi as well, when I look back at my career, you talk about winning an Olympic gold medal, those types of things. That is impossible for someone, from the Northern Territory of Australia without having or being part of an amazing group that's around you. I think Jimi mentioned it in terms of goalkeepers that you remember. Sometimes it's because of the individual things that they won, but they played with fantastic teammates. But I'll mention one just for their way that they sort of went about things, and that's Grant Schubert. Striker, again, maybe came into the top level of the game around sort of 2003-04 with a different sort of skill set, but was one of those guys from a sort of country area of Australia that always seemed to have things under control. Not only obviously highly skilled and able to score goals in really difficult sort of moments, but always had that sort of almost smile on their face and saw things as a challenge rather than a threat. And if I look at, things that I admire in goalkeepers now, it's that ability to see challenge instead of threat. I think that's a really important character trait. Hursty.
Well, that was a great answer, and I think you're absolutely right. And mentioning individuals is tricky because it is a team game, and there were many, many players in many, many teams that I played with who I respected enormously because I knew they were good team people and I knew they never let you down. But if I go back further to somebody that probably wasn't a great team player, but was an outstanding player, and still amongst the best players I've ever seen, a guy called Mike Corby, who now is probably in his late 70s and was a natural ball player at all sports that he played. I was lucky. I played with him early in my career and very late in his. So I didn't play with him for very long, but I saw him play club hockey too. And watching him play for Southgate in the European Club Championship in the mid-70s on grass, when they won it 3 years in a row, I think. The thing that struck me about him was he was standing on the line at a penalty corner. And they were all hit in those days on grass. And inevitably playing the final against a good German team, the ball was past the goalkeeper. And Mike would be moving into position to be behind the line of the shot just as they were hitting it. He could read it off the stick just as they were hitting it. He would have made a great goalkeeper, but he made a great tennis player. He made a great golfer. He made a great, every game he played, he was
one of the best squash players in the world as well.
Pardon?
He was one of the best squash players in the world.
He was number 2, I think, in the world as a squash player. And there's lots of stories, Jimi. You may have been around when he took the Dutch number 1 off number 1 on, I should say, in his probably late 50s, early 60s. Just took his tie off. He borrowed a racket from the Dutch number 1 and wiped the floor with him. In his suit.
Yeah.
But he knew it. I mean, Mike's probably Achilles' heel was he was not a humble man. But maybe you don't need to be a humble man if you're that good. But he was a superb player to play with because you knew that if he got the ball, things were going to happen. Took the pressure off at the back.
Go on, Jim.
For me, yeah, I mean, both Hursty and Hickey have both said the same thing. There's obviously a hell of a lot of good players that I play with. If you play at the top level of the game for so long as we did, then there's obviously going to be a lot of amazing players you played with and played against. For me, the one that's had the most influence on my career is Russell Garcia. We're from the same city, same school, same hometown club. We haven't. National team, we're still best friends. We both live in Hamburg. We're best friends. He's godfather to my son, and I'm godfather to his daughter. And but he has had a big influence on my life. On the pitch or in the training, he was always very, very professional, very focused. He was ahead of the game. He was someone who thought about the game a hell of a lot. He, you know him, Al, from Scotland as well. I mean, he was a Scottish coach for quite a while, or for 2 years. And he just thinks, acts, sleeps, eats, breathes hockey 24/7. And he was someone who inspired me to kind of do the same, to be honest. And but he was also a very fair competitor. He was never a dirty player. He was never unfair, never moaned about referees. Always took responsibility for his own actions, his own mistakes. Was very humble when he was successful. Was very analytic when he was not successful. And yeah, he was someone who inspired me a hell of a lot. And he was one of the best players in the world for a certain phase, and obviously one of the best players in England as well. And won an Olympic gold medal at 18 in the GB 1988 team. And he set a target when he was 15 years old that he would go to the 1988 Olympics and get in that Olympic team. We're talking about a team that was full of guys aged from about 28 to 32. At the pinnacle of their career, they'd been together for about 6 years, maybe even longer, and had achieved a hell of a lot. And he broke into that team, I think, was 17 years old, which is an amazing achievement. And he's still the youngest ever hockey gold medal winner. So it's a guy who inspired me a hell of a lot, and still does these days, to be honest.
Fantastic. Alan, you going to share some knowledge?
Well, I think everyone said there's so many people you could mention and get quite a lot of stick for not mentioning others. I think probably the one person that does stick out, obviously I mentioned my dad earlier has been an influence of playing in goal, but actually it was always watching my brother play. So playing in the same team as him, you knew that when he got the ball that he could do something to change the game. Whether it was indoor and we needed to protect the lead, he would just go and take it into the boards in the corner, would hang on to it for 6 minutes, while every other player in the other team would try and foul him to get the ball off. You knew he was that kind of reliable player to kind of put the team on his shoulders and then just take us over the line. So I think playing in the same team as him, it was always good. But then it was always an interesting one playing against him occasionally as well. Sort of, you knew that he was going to be the threat that we were going to have to shut down. So I think of all the players, it is probably him in terms of the biggest influence and sort of someone I look to for that sort of inspiration.
Great. I think that's a really good note to finish this evening. We've covered some really great stuff, and the feedback we're getting there. I know the new lingo is takeaways over here. So lots of takeaways from all the budding goalies and coaches that have joined us. On behalf of Allan and myself and Hero Goalie Co, I want to thank all of our guests, Mark, Hurst and Jimi. Thoroughly enjoyed that. Could probably go on for another hour, but we won't. Guys, very, very kind of you to give up your time. Thank you very much indeed.
Absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Take care, guys. We'll call it a night there. Thanks for joining us. Take care.
Bye-bye. Ciao, ciao.
Bye.
Bye.